So thanks for having me. So this is, as Mike suggested already, that this is part of this research I did with Lena Knapper. She's an architect, and she was doing her thesis on Amsterdam at that time. And as Mike already said, that my work as an advisor of the Spatial Quality Committee, which is an independent advisory committee to the City Council of Amsterdam on all building projects. That was also the reason why I started this research, because what struck me at the time was that in almost all building plans that were presented by the developers and the architects at that time, they were mainly built for temporary residents. So there were either micro apartments for international students or large, very overpriced apartments for expats. And that struck me, and it fascinated me, but also worried me a little bit for what kind of city will this produce in the long run. So, and also the fact that Amsterdam, just like Rotterdam, is a super diverse city, and it easily can be compared to all the big Western European cities such as Berlin or Paris or London, that always have served as migrant magnets for centuries already. So these two elements combined made me want to delve in a little bit deeper in the history of the development of Amsterdam as a city of comings and goings, and see if there might be any lessons to be learned that could be of help in thinking about the city of the future. So, so nowadays the city is still growing immensely, even though COVID, it's interesting to see what kind of effect it will have in the long run on the city, but the building pressure continues massively. So I'm happy to take you through the research. I won't be able to unveil the whole history of Amsterdam, but I will take you through some key elements or moments in time that I think are interesting for you to see in what way migrants have in some way shaped the form of the city. So I wrote it down because I don't want to get distracted, and I don't have a lot of time, and it's a long history. So the first major influx of migrants to Amsterdam dates back to the 17th century. During the so-called Golden Age of the Dutch Republic, the economy boomed enormously as a result of the numerous voyages that were undertaken to other parts of the world and the trade of colonial goods. So Amsterdam was at that point the dynamic economic but also cultural epicenter of the Republic, and caused an immense growth in employment and attracted a large group of newcomers, mainly poor, unskilled laborers. So the domestic and both foreign guest workers soon made up the majority of the city population, and in fact formed the economic motor of the city. Without them, the city could not function. And within the context of this growth, the first large-scale extensions were planned. The construction of the canal belt, the grachtengordel, which is iconic, of course, it's now UNESCO World Heritage, but also which was meant for the merchants and the city's elite, but also that of the Jordaan Quarter, which you see on the right. It's the more rectangular extension of the city, which was specifically intended for workers and newcomers, mainly originating from Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Norway. And thanks to the large-scale city extension that tripled the dimensions of the city, Amsterdam was able to absorb the growing group of newcomers until the mid-19th century. Due to the poor living conditions of the available housing, for leisure and other activities, the Amsterdam inhabitants turned to one of the many inns that the city had. So herberg, often situated in the vicinity of the commercial areas. And besides leisure, this was the place where merchants traded, where the urban elite discussed politics, where they went out to have a drink. And it was a place where newcomers, laborers, but also the urban elite, the richer classes mixed, albeit in different rooms, but this was a place where they met. So this is an image of Apjen. This is an inn that's still here. In Amsterdam, in the eastern parts of the inner city. Yes, I think it's the last one, so yeah. Yeah. So the middle of the 19th century marked a new moment in which the city flourished economically and was flooded with people from abroad again, influenced obviously by the Industrial Revolution and the modernization of infrastructure. So these big steamships now arrived in the city, and the port activities expanded dramatically, and there were new harbors that were dug out. And these became the places where the workers from all over the world went to for temporary work, but often permanently settled into the city. During this period, a place like Chinatown emerged in the city, in the eastern parts of the inner city. And the Chinese were actively recruited by port companies because they were considered very hardworking, very cheap labor. So, you know, good to have around in the ports. And they settled in the oldest part of the city and lived in boarding houses. Here on the left, is the Kadijk, and later shared their culture as in stores and restaurants with the city. So for a long time, it was still possible, as I said, to absorb all these enormous influx of people within the old city boundaries in the Jordaan and the Grachtengordel, but the limits of the elastic city up till then came in sight in the middle of the 19th century. So in many areas, the living conditions were very poor, intolerable, inhumane, especially in the houses from the 17th and 18th century. And a large-scale extension had to be thought of again to accommodate the expected growth of the population and also the flow of the newcomers. It led to the planning of a whole new ring of city extensions around the canal belt, and the realization of these buildings was actually left to small entrepreneurs, which led to a process of housing speculation. So they almost exclusively built small houses, the cheapest building materials, to make a profitable business case. So the appearance of the facades like neighbourhoods as the Pijp, as de Pijp, Staatsliedenbuurt, Kinkerbuurt, Dapperbuurt. This is Zwelingstraat. Zwelingstraat is Zuid, denk ik, hè? Ja, Pijp. Ja. It was, well, all these streets were more or less the same. They're all have the elongated four-story front of houses, four-story layers with units, 3 to 5 rooms, so-called alcove types. But and these houses were without exception occupied by the lower and the middle classes, among which, of course, a large part of the newcomers. And the well-to-do classes mainly lived in the canal belt, or they moved out of the city to het Gooi, to Kennemerland. And part of the expansion plan of 1877 from Kalf, which you see here on the left, also was the projection of public parks, such as the Oosterpark, the Vondelpark, Sarfati Park, which had a large influence on the lives of the workers. That is not to be underestimated, because they all lived in super tiny houses with a lot of people, very unsanitary, unhygienic. So this was a place where they could, you know, get some fresh air. These parks were also heavily programmed in the sense that there were petting zoo, tea houses, some sort of theater, a performance place, and this is also where the well-to-do classes went. So this was also, again, like the inn, a place where people could meet up and have a sense of each other's existence in the city. So the new Housing Act in 1901 gave some comfort to the poor housing conditions and resulted in the creation of serious social housing policies. It meant that housing owners could be ordered to repair their houses, but also it resulted in the founding of housing associations, woningcorporaties, and they all had their own ideological signature, and they started to build good but cheap houses for the masses. And because social housing associations commissioned the buildings, housing was realized in one hand, and in this case the familiar architecture style of the Amsterdamse school. So this is the Spaandammerbuurt. This is social housing. You see that all over the city. Slightly less well known is that the city expansion to the north side of the River Ij was prompted by a refugee crisis. At the outbreak of the World War I, the Dutch capital suddenly had to deal with a big influx of refugees from Belgium. The war drove about 1 million refugees across the border to neutral Netherlands. It also says welcome in neutral Netherlands. So more than 20,000 war victims landed up in Amsterdam, but there was no space for them. So first they were put up in barracks and in warehouses, but to solve the general housing shortage at that time, which had worsened obviously with the arrival of the Belgian refugees, it was decided to plan emergency housing. And in Amsterdam this took place in the form of Belgian villages that were planned for the first time at the north bank of the River Ij. Which was only accessible by ferry. So the first emergence of emergency villages that were built were our Obelt, Disteldorp and Vogeldorp. This is around 1919. And well, in contrast to the multi-layered closed city blocks that we saw earlier, in these temporary garden villages, small terraced houses were built in a more rural atmosphere, modeled on the English garden city as an alternative to the well, dense inner cities. And these houses were meant to only last for 10 to 15 years. So they were all constructed in timber, attached to concrete slabs, but most of them are still there. And they are now listed as local monuments because of their aesthetical and also the cultural qualities or value. So as a result of the Second World War, 500,000 people in the Netherlands had lost their homes. About 120 houses had been destroyed. Especially Amsterdam was hit especially hard. Around 80,000 Jewish people were brutally taken away from their houses and murdered in concentration camps. And after these razzias, whole streets and neighborhoods remained empty for 20 years or so, and became seriously run down. So until they were largely replaced for good, rightly enough, by large-scale infrastructure and the metro system, the underground system in the eastern parts of Amsterdam.
Do you know what street?
No, I'm not sure. Looks at Leidsestraat, hè? I'm not sure. I can look it up for you. I don't have the bijschrift here. So just like everywhere in Europe, there was an incredible housing shortage in the city after the war, and led to the finalization of the Westelijke Tuinsteden, which is a large-scale Nieuw West, a large-scale extension in the western parts of the city. And parallel to that, the reconstruction caused a great demand in labor, in construction and the recovering trade of the Netherlands. And lacking enough Dutch workers, the industry started to actively recruit people from abroad. Between 1949 and 1975, tens of thousands of guest workers came from Italy to the Netherlands. And Amsterdam was particularly a popular destination because there was a lot of shortage in labor in the shipping industry. So the Amsterdam Dry Dock Company, ADM, played a very boosting role in the active recruitment of these foreign guest workers. So the first Italians came to work in the shipyards, and they stayed in especially created boarding houses, or accommodation was found at the people's homes. But in addition to that, housing was also developed on a larger scale. For their Italian workers, for instance, ADM planned Poelenburg district just outside of Amsterdam North in Zaandam, which was also called Little Italy in the polder. So apartment buildings there were referred to as spaghetti blocks because of so many Italians living there. So this is an image of Poelenburg. So the gradual arrival of groups of South Europeans in the beginning of the 60s was a starting point of a large-scale immigration process that strongly influenced our Dutch society and also the composition of the population during the 80s and laid the foundation of the present-day multicultural society. Most new migrants that were brought to the Netherlands for wage labor were from Morocco and from Turkey. And this shift of demographics also took place in Amsterdam. Next to the boarding houses, they were called guest workers' warehouses and Turkenhuizen, and accommodation in private houses throughout the Netherlands. Living resorts were built. And these were temporary collective apartment of accommodations in barracks, former canteens, in schools, and were refurbished especially for the guest workers, and were always almost directly built in the vicinity of the workplace, so far away from the inner city. So the general idea was that they would come here and work and then return to their homeland at some time. And once they arrived, they often ended up living in a living resort like this one. This is Atatürk on the Klaprozenweg in Amsterdam North. And they lived then 8 men to a room. So the two global oil crises that afflicted the world during the 70s resulted in an overall economic decline. And it drove the Dutch government to limit the entry of guest workers drastically. So the legislation was made tougher for them in 1974. But what happened is it resulted in an unintentional backlash of guest workers already working in the Netherlands, because the situation in their homeland wasn't much better, so they decided to transform their temporary work permit into a permanent one. And also instead of returning, they asked the family to join them here in the Netherlands. So, and what happened was that after the wives and the children joined the workers here, the men left the resorts at the edges of the city and turned to the houses in the 19th century neighborhoods that I just showed you, because there was still affordable houses available, and that was mostly due to the part that the original population had left these houses. Within the context of the Dutch welfare state, they were now financially in a better position and able to leave the house and move to the districts outside of Amsterdam, which had bigger houses. They could, buy houses. They had front and back gardens, so there was a lot of space for the guest workers to move in with their families. So the switch that the guest workers and their families made to the city made that these neighborhoods, like the Pijp, quickly changed in color. For the first time, after having many years led an invisible life in the fringes of the city, migrants actually became part of the urban society. And the scene in the typical Amsterdam working class streets displayed now the presence of their new inhabitants. All of a sudden, one could find team rooms, Islamic butchers, Turkish bakers. And in the traditional open-air markets like the Albert Kuip, one could, besides potatoes and kale, also buy typical North African products like eggplant or bulgur or whatever. And also interested, in addition, the first very typical satellite dishes appeared on the facades of the houses, which gave away the origin of its residents. So the greatest part of social housing in Amsterdam was owned by local housing associations that I spoke of earlier. And their policy with regard to the allocations of the houses laid down that the descent of the applicant could not play a role. But an active form of government intervention actually with respect to an even spreading of the newcomers in the city developed with the approaching independence of Dutch colony Suriname in 1975. In the years preceding the independence of this former colony, the prospect of it caused an exodus of Surinamese people to the Netherlands. In total, 140,000 people from Suriname migrated to the Netherlands, of which the largest group was accommodated in Amsterdam. And having to deal with the unforeseen Turkish and Moroccan family reunification process at the same time, possibilities were sought to contain the Surinamese and other migration flows and spread the burden evenly across the country. But much rather than being exiled to a resort, The Surinamese were drawn to a brand new district that was being completed just a couple of years before in the southeastern parts of the city, but somehow had not appealed to the Amsterdammers to go and live there, the Bijlmer. This was an ultra-modern extension meant to relieve the housing shortage in the city. And the ambitions for the Bijlmer were sky high. The flats were designed in a series of identical slabs of 11 floors, arranged in this typical and very well-known honeycomb structure, that were all connected with a system of collective raised streets. And it was meant to be a showcase for the modern Amsterdammer, but they all stayed away. That has lots of reasons, but we won't go into that now. But due to all this, these flats remained empty. And initially, housing associations stimulated the Surinamese to settle in these Bijlmer flats for practical reasons, because they were already empty and, well, they needed to be filled. And these flats were quickly, appropriated or furnished to the needs of the Surinamese. So they took the initiative to informally use the parking lots beneath the flats for their amenities that the Bijlmer was lacking, such as the churches to practice their religion, but also to gambling or prostitution, also very necessary, strip joints. And the long galleries, the collective galleries, were used to slaughter chicken and goats for dinner. So the by now frightening image of the Bijlmer, dominated by the Surinamese, was used by the national government to push through a national distribution policy. That the Surinamese that were still anticipated to be coming here in Amsterdam were to be spread, or in the Netherlands were to be spread all over, with a slogan, every city its fair share. So every city had its own set of quite blunt measures to house the Surinamese. Also here in Rotterdam there was a similar policy, and it was laid down that certain districts could house no more than one non-European ethnicity per walk-up tenement. And some districts were just closed off for foreigners. Such as the Stadionbuurt, Indische buurt, Van der Pekstraat. And these policies were abolished in 1979 because they were just under international pressure, because they're just simply very racist. The Bijlmer, however, stayed a home base for the Surinamese, and then later the people from Ghana and the Dutch Antilles arrived also, and they often lived more families on one address and very much below poverty line. So this neighborhood quickly declined and became famous for the heroin trade, and well, it was a ghetto. This, well, I don't know if you can read it, but the wider image, it says only accessible for people of Dutch descent. So again, the oil crisis left the city of Amsterdam in a general crisis, and it contrasted sharply with the Amsterdam that we know today as a very hip and very interesting city, or attractive city. And business had slowly but surely moved away to the city, away from the city, and a migration out of instead of inside the city took place. So the ambitiously planned Westelijke Tuinsteden and also the Bijlmer had become a home base for the original newcomers. So Turks, Moroccans, Antillians, and Surinamese, and often clashed with the original population living there, as you see on the right. Lots of riots took place. But during the 90s, the city was able to reposition itself again as an economic and cultural magnet, but one that aimed at the development of a service economy instead of the industrial economy. And in the wake of this, Amsterdam became more and more popular with young, highly educated people, the so-called creative class, as Richard Florida has coined. And well, found a home in the renovated 19th century blocks. and leading to early forms of gentrification, but also a whole new city development, as here on the Java-eiland, which were the places where the old steamships used to come and where the migrants would embark. Let me see. So and this is also something that the city of Amsterdam stimulated to attract a lot of people, different people to the city after years of decline. And I could say this is like the third moment in time where the economic opportunities that the city offered led to a third wave of migrants to the city. This trend of international attraction has been going on. Even now, there's of course a small hiatus because of Corona, but I think, well, we can discuss this later. I think it's still going on. So in 2000, I think Amsterdam received the largest numbers of newcomers in the Netherlands each year. In 2017, a record number of migrants arrived in the capital, almost half of the total number of newcomers in the Netherlands, about 38,000, and consisted of highly skilled and creative migrants, very diverse group, international students, young professionals, EU workers, asylum seekers, refugees. So very broad selection of people. And what you see now is that the city as it now is coming apart at the seams because of this massive arrival of newcomers. And they have caused an enormous growth in the city and construction projects where the private sector has completely taken over and the city is more or less, trying to keep up. They are drawing up master plans and then everything is built already. So this is more or less the situation now. And in contrast to the earlier, so the 17th century and the 19th century, which was the city was still able to, absorb these people. Now the city had reached the limits. So there was no space left for them. So we need to go up and build denser. Because all the available land is now in use. So to give you an image of how the city of Amsterdam is transforming, so these are two projects, Pontsteiger and I think it's called Changes in Zuidwest. So either apartments for the rich expats and the foreign investors, and the international students are being housed in these they're very small, tiny apartments. And also, the legislation and the policies of the city is very much aimed to attracting these groups because they simply bring in the money. They are willing to pay a lot of money for small houses for a short amount of time. So another group that has impacted the city are the refugees. So in the past, like the Belgian refugees of the First World War were accommodated in warehouses and barracks. But also in the 90s when Amsterdam was faced with the influx of people from the Balkan, the Yugoslavian war. Around 50,000 people came to the Netherlands and were housed, also a large part in Amsterdam. And again, at first they turned to emergency shelter, but having learned from the lessons also from the Belgians, this was reconsidered, and they tried to formulate a more structural policy for the housing of the refugees. So, for instance, the Lubbers administration advocated the construction of 2.5 emergency houses throughout the Netherlands for the accommodation of refugees with a permit. And this is like a buffer house. It was always there. If there's an influx, then you could house, refugees if needed. And the housing associations were also made responsible for housing these refugees. And since it was installed, this policy in 1993, thousands of refugees were fairly quietly accommodated in Amsterdam. And they were provided with council house. But the last few years, Amsterdam has faced a similar challenge of accommodating people from Iraq, from Syria, Iran, Somalia. But because of the contemporary pressure of the housing market, there are no more houses available because they're all been sold off to private parties. So there's hardly any resources left. And we see it now also with the arrival of refugees from Afghanistan, that now again they have to be housed in barracks and in warehouses. This is an image of Marineterrein in the inner city of Amsterdam, where I think up till last week they were housed there temporarily, which is just crazy.
Young migrants.
Yes, which is very.
Since a month already, I think.
Sorry?
The camp there.
Yeah. Yeah. Very recently, so this is already outdated. But just to give you an idea how Amsterdam has to deal with migrants again, because there's no houses left for them.
I also remember that they were housed in Belmarbias, so that's like they were housed in prison, which is you flee your country and then you're housing
True.
in prison. It's very
Yeah.
sad, I think.
Yeah. No, absolutely true. So, so this is another group of people that also, have an impact on the development of Amsterdam in some way. So, in order to cope with the influx of these new arrivals, around 50,000 houses need to be built in various locations in Amsterdam up till 2025. So we're nearly there. But they turn to densification and transformation since the city cannot be enlarged. The last few available areas, from former shipyards to brownfields that are still left, are being developed into living areas. And I think virtually every existing industrial estate along the A10, the ring road, are being transformed in highly urban living areas. And the houses will be quite small. And they are branded as micro apartments, etc. But they bring to mind the idea that we saw in the 19th century about lots of houses being built very fast for a lot of people. And to tell you that over the 5,000 houses that were built in 2015, over 56% was smaller than 40 square meters. That's just tiny.
Because then you don't have to have outdoor space, right?
Right. So you can see that the private market find their way to build quickly for these groups, because they're not, they come here temporary, and then they're willing to pay an enormous amount of money because it's very difficult to find a place elsewhere. So I'm almost getting to the end here. So critics argue that Amsterdam is increasingly built for the needs of one specific group, the expats and the international students. And the affluent people, the rich class in general, and that the amount of space for, as the amount of space for the rich people increases, the amount of space for the people who are less well off decreases. And people are afraid that Amsterdam is becoming, or it has become, too homogeneous and very segregated, as there's very little suitable housing left for other types of city inhabitants. So with the enormous growth of the population and the focus on building residential work complexes, public space is also under enormous pressure. Slowly the edges of the green lobes that provide the city with oxygen and breathing space are nibbled at for new buildings. Allotment complexes are being sold, and the grounds are being allocated for new developments. And also the city parks are undergoing quite a similar process. They're in danger of becoming less accessible. And while the parks are clearly vital lungs of the city, they are green, they're open, and they're welcoming to everyone. And so important, as we saw in the 19th century already, that this is a place where people meet up and they can actually, acknowledge each other's existence in the city. And also in like the 17th century, the inn, a place where people met from all walks of life. And the parks, I think the parks are one of the last places in the city and the squares where this kind of interaction between different people still takes place. But you see here that these and other parks are getting closed off more and more for festivals. So you have to pay a ticket to get there and enjoy the festival. obviously their festivals are needed in the city also, but it has a consequence that other people are not able to go there anymore. So this is like, these are parks that are being closed off for weeks for festivals. So to finalize and summarize, from the 17th century onwards, massive numbers of newcomers from abroad arrived in Amsterdam and attracted by the economic opportunities that the city gave them. And for many centuries, these guest workers kept the economic engine of the city going and eventually blended in the city permanently. So the influx of these migrants have shaped the city of Amsterdam in the past. So the important question for the present is how we can make sure that the city, as it has been before, remains open and open to everyone. And how can spatial and social cohesion between the numerous construction projects that riddle the city be ensured still? How can a more diverse and balanced distribution of housing types for all layers of population can take place? How can the comings and goings of all residents of Amsterdam be divided fairly and proportionately across the city? These are very important spatial and social questions that Amsterdam has to deal with to remain the welcoming and liberal and open city, migrant city that it has been effectively been since the 17th century. I don't have all the answers. I have some ideas about it, but who am I? So that's it. So this is in a nutshell.
Thanks a lot, Annuska. I think it was also one of the conclusions, right, more or less of the total research, is what this shows very nicely also, is that a big part of the, let's say, crisis of migration, or the problems that come with migration, has to do with housing. Right? It's not really a migration crisis, it's a housing crisis.
It is,
yeah,
yes.
And actually this shows that each time that a wave of migrants come in, which are needed actually for the economy, right? The economy is booming, so it attracts migrants, we need them, but we don't facilitate the housing.
No.
And I think that's an important thing to realize also when looking at Afrikaanderwijk, and also when looking at all the developments that are going on there, when you see that actually the amount of social housing is being diminished.
Yeah. But also one of the things that I learned from this research is also how important public facilities are. Not just parks or squares, but also public swimming pools or public libraries, but also consultatiebureau. This is the place where every parent has to bring their kids, in order to be weighed and checked up. This is
first couple of years.
For the first couple of years. So these are very important places that also the city plays a very important part, because they own the real estate that these types of facilities are in, but they're mostly very poorly housed. And as we have seen in the 17th century, that the inn and also the parks in the 19th century played such an important place for people to come together and also have air. But this is now these are not the places that's being aimed at by the city, because even public space is being overgelaten, is being left to private parties. Whereas it is like the glue that keeps the society together. And it bothers me that there's hardly any emphasis on this types of development by the city in general, not just Amsterdam, also in Rotterdam, I think everywhere. So I think if you give more attention to these types of public facilities, you can also show that people matter. All people matter. So also, to me, it was one of the lessons that I learned, that it's important to not forget these key elements in the city. Do you have any questions, maybe?
Yes, you mentioned that the city of Amsterdam has, in terms of housing and development and extension, actually has reached its limits.
Yeah.
Is it purely spatial limits or maybe ownership? And so my question is, how much of the land of Amsterdam, the city and its surroundings, is owned by the city or the municipalities, or
Well,
is it in terms of this ownership limit or its spatial limit?
it's a spatial limit, but it's becoming an ownership limit as well, because the city sells off land, all available land, to private parties. And this is part of the financial system that's also adding to the problem, is that they sell off the land for a high price, because they also want to make money, because they have to construct roads and schools, etc. And then the developers for them it's financially the most feasible ways to build expensive houses. So I think it's also important that cities or government should not try to earn so much money on the land, because they keep this whole system of housing shortages in place. Yeah.
There's an interesting system, and it's more in Amsterdam than in Rotterdam, in which the municipality remains the owner of the land,
Yeah.
right? But they
Yeah, erfpacht. It is.
they kind of rent it out for long-term leases.
Yeah.
So for 100 years.
So I think this is a very interesting, because they tried to get rid of the system. This is an old system, erfpacht system, but I think it's a very interesting instrument. If you keep the ground, the land in your own pocket, then you'll able to steer and navigate what will happen to the land.
Yeah, that is something to stick with.
Yeah.
As a mechanism. And also, there's been, at least I've heard a lot of buzz about Amsterdam North and the development. So how would you comment that with the clash of existing residents and the new developments over there, which is highly efficiently promoted as the new part of Amsterdam?
Yeah. Well, this is I think this is like the last place in Amsterdam where the same thing happens, where it has already happened in other parts. So I don't know where the image is, but these villages, these temporary garden villages that you have there, they were planned for the workers that worked in ADM or NDSM, the shipyards. And now they're being refurbished by the housing associations who built them, and being sold off to make money to build other houses elsewhere. So these houses are now extremely expensive to live there. So yeah, it's just there's definitely a clash between people who used to live there and who are now being pushed out of the city. There's no space left, I think. It's quite.
Well, and in that sense, what you see happening with Amsterdam North is kind of a pressure cooking version of what's happening with Rotterdam South, right?
Yeah.
It's
For sure.
Also in the Afrikaanderwijk,
Yeah.
you see more or less that same development, that the former residents are either pushed out, or like the developments or the housing prices are rising to such an extent that they feel like they have to move somewhere. And the Tweebosbuurt is of course the worst example of this.
Yeah.
Where it's a conscious decision to kind of displace people for more well-to-do citizens. But I think in Amsterdam North you see that on a huge scale, right? Not per se the demolishing of housing,
No.
but much more the transformation of
Yeah.
this former shipyards as a last place where they can build really high density housing blocks.
Yeah, and especially along the riverbank,
Yeah.
there are now the most expensive houses of Amsterdam are being built there.
Yeah.
If you want to live there, you have to bring €1 million for a tiny apartment. And what has added also is the improved connection because of the metro line that was connected to the northern parts. So all these high rises, well, not so much high rises, I think
Yeah,
15, 20 floor stories high are being built around this the metro station. So it's transforming, absolutely.
Well, 15 years ago, no one wanted to
No.
live there.
No.
Super fast.
Yeah.
Annuska, you said something about the, I didn't know
Yeah.
There was a buffer,
Yeah. It's sold off now, of course.
but was it legislation?
Yeah. So it was in response to the poor housing of refugees. Lubbers said, or the administration of Lubbers said,
Lubbers was the former
Prime Minister, sorry. He said we need to have like a buffer stock of houses. So in case we have to deal with incidentele or yeah, and huge influx of new people, then we have a place for them to live in. And
It was a nice point. And this new administration kind of
yeah, so rightly after, so it,
Lubbers was when?
in the 90s, yeah, in the 90s.
And was there a percentage? You said 2,500.
So it's not so much, but you know, no, across, in addition to the council houses of the housing associations. So I don't know the exact numbers, how they were spread all over the country, but the idea was that we need to have space available when we have to deal with massive influx of new people, whether it's a refugee crisis or, but because things changed and because there was such a housing shortage, they sold off all these excess houses. So there was no elasticity, no stretch, flexibility left.
yeah, this was a nice point in the river because it's a kind of a proper approach
Yeah.
towards new and future ways of newcomers. Because, like you stated, we're not the waves are not finished.
Hmm.
There's going to be more.
Yes,
more.
they're going to be
More
here.
than evident.
Yeah. So this would also be a lesson learned for me, that you need to have a lot of available houses which are not already labeled and sold to the or taken over by private market.
And not built in the crisis.
No.
In
Yeah.
the period of crisis.
Yeah.
So the cost can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
The valuation.
Yeah.
Last question. Observation.
So I have a question for you, because you went to the Afrikaanderwijk. Did you see any of the public facilities that I spoke about there?
Yeah, I actually think the library is functioning as the way, because when we were there on Monday in the afternoon, like all the young kids would just chill there and hang out. And then also these guys that are doing like social work in the neighborhood, they went there to get coffee. But I also spoke with one guy and he was like, yeah, there needs to be more facilities for the young kids, like to play soccer or to go swimming for free or go to the library for free, because now they're just hanging around and making noise here. But they should have more public space. So he actually said what you were saying, that we need more public space for the younger people.
And in the new plans for Afrikaanderwijk, is that taken care of, that types of facilities? Do we know that?
Well, a bit in
Well,
this
there's
house for the.
House south, yeah,
south.
new swimming pool and a library, I think, and some amenities.
Hmm.
Most is just rental or shops or stuff like that.
But it,
Yeah, and also all those, I'm still fascinated by it, all those closed gardens, so it's for a selective kind of exclusion of
Mhm.
public space only for some people.
yeah, so that's also, I think, a danger of giving away the planning of public space or semi-public space to private parties, is that they are allowed to close off this space, and whereas they say we won't do it, but they can do it legally. And when we did we went with students from TU Delft to Amsterdam also to discuss the parks in the meaning of the parks in Amsterdam, and we went to the Department of Statistics and we spoke to this guy. He's the director, Jeroen Slot, and he said it also has to do with the programming and the landscaping of the gardens. So in the Vondelpark, for instance, people are not allowed to barbecue anymore. So it's you're not allowed. So what happens is that all the originally migrant families from the Westkatuinsteden, from New West, they live in the tiny apartments. When it's hot, you want to go outside and, you know, eat outside. So they were not allowed anymore to the Vondelpark, which means that the Vondelpark is now being a more like an exclusive area for tourists and people living around the park. There's no need for them to go in there anymore because they're not allowed to barbecue. So now they go to the Rembrandt Park or to the Flevo Park. So if you don't facilitate this type of use, or if you forbid them, this, you know,
Actually, I don't know, but I can imagine that in the Afrikander Square, that park that was made there. I don't think you can barbecue there either.
No, but if you would allow it, I think a lot of people would be there.
Yeah, but then at least choose.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But I also saw this in parks, for example, in New York. On a Sunday, people just come and all, like everything. Tables, chairs. They just barbecue there for the whole day. They use it as their backyard, basically.
yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Because then it was really used as public space. But
Yeah, it's the same in Brussel Park, for example, or Rembrandt Park.
Yeah.
yeah.
So would you kind of comment that this regulation or restrictions are aimed towards newcomers and migrants, or is it just
What policies when you,
for
it means
example, the restrictions of not parking in the parks? So is it a kind of clearing up space from newcomers?
I think it's a very practical way of making sure that there's no litter in the park. But the more foregoing of more the effect of it is that you exclude people, and I think that they're just not so much aware of the fact that if you don't allow this, then you exclude people from your park. Because if you are really interested in people, you know that they would like to barbecue in outer space if it's nice weather. So it's yeah. I don't think it's intentional. I'm not sure. What do you think? It's just
I don't think so. It's just not.
onnozelheid, denk ik eerder.
I think a lot of consequences of actually policy decisions that have been made about the access have a big influence on the accessibility of the city.
Yeah.
That goes for housing, that goes for public amenities, that goes for public space.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting as well is that there's actually in your story it became clear that there's also this relation between the crises, like the oil crisis, but also it was not only the oil.
No, it's both oil crisis, yeah. Or refugee crisis.
Yeah, but of course then in the financial crisis of 2008, actually a lot of this infrastructure that had been built in the 80s, 90s, and before, has been broken down
Exactly.
in a really short amount of time.
Yeah, yeah.
While maybe in the oil crisis, we had a completely different approach, right? We built these
Yeah.
houses for
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
while in the financial crisis we sold them all off.
Yeah.
And we didn't build anything anymore.
No.
That's, I think,
And left it over to the market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's also a completely different response to this crisis, which actually now creates an even worse situation because we're not capable anymore or equipped anymore
Yeah.
to deal with influxes of people
Yeah.
and with the rising housing prices, extreme bubble
Yeah.
that has been created or that is there now. It's kind of a direct result of decisions that were made in 2008.
There is, however, I think there's a shift now, nowadays, that the city of Amsterdam realizes that you should not only build for expats or international students, that you also have to keep in the families, because they're all being pushed out of the city. So now they are trying to make new policies that don't allow foreign investors to develop houses and then sell them off directly. So you need to live there for a couple of years. So this is a tool to keep people in the city, and also they are trying to force in larger developments that 30% of the available housing has to be social housing. So they're trying to do it, but it's not really being very effective because they still sell off the land for a high price. So is it window dressing? Is it actually a very effective tool? I'm not quite sure. And also social housing, they don't say what type of social housing. So it could also be social housing for students. So then again, it's not social housing for families, for instance. If you are not, if you don't define social housing, then you get the most easy apartments, easy buildable apartments, and the most profitable apartments.
The guy from the corporation,
Ah, seeds, we know them.
Albert. He was. We were standing and right opposite the metro station was this new building with some type of maybe 30% of some percentage of social housing.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, I said, how would you comment that? And he was like, well, we stand here in front of our shop every day and think like, oh, look how it would be nice to live over there, you know, have money to live over there. And he noted that the social housing, the potential social housing is not for the residents and not for low-income families, that it was a very neglected category of citizens. For example, homeless, not sure if of students, but really this high contrast of residents inside the building and not really for the use of families that have a need for the social housing.
Yeah. It's easier to build for this doelgroep, doelgroep. Yeah, because they don't need so much. You know, you build tiny cells, whereas a family would need more rooms and room to play, and difficult, too complex, too expensive. And then if we are now in the situation that we are all living in tiny apartments, then at least there should be plenty of collective space to counterbalance this housing situation.
Would you say this like responsibility to provide it is more in the municipalities? Because for me as an architect, for example, I have somebody that tells me I need to make this type of housing, and there's like I actually did a project in Amsterdam.
Mm-hmm.
There's a makelaar, I don't know, a guy that sells the house and wants to sell the house, and he says, well, I see these square meters, I see 1.5 million, and then I'm like, okay, so now I'm designing a house in Amsterdam city center, which is going for 1.5 million, and I feel kind of bad because I feel like there's not normal people going to buy this house because I definitely not afford it, and it's still a 2-bedroom house.
Yeah.
So I find it difficult then to say like, or also in Rotterdam in the south, we also have this kind of project, and I'm like, am I responsible to tell the guy that's giving me the assignment to be like, hey, well maybe if we push the building back a little bit, we create more public space, or maybe we can make, instead of 20 houses, we can make 40 houses here, if we make them a bit smaller, and instead of houses of 1.5 million, or in Rotterdam South for like 8 tons.
I think it's absolutely a dilemma that the architect has to deal with. I was just asking the same question last week that we had a presentation by an urban planner of the city of Amsterdam, and that was a very funny, or always funny presentation, because she always starts her presentation with a housing plan with plattegrond, just a living area. And she says we are, as urban planners, are facilitating these types of tiny micro apartments where there's only room for one single bed, and it's more or less in the kitchen. Yeah. So, and we were looking at many of these plans, she showed us. These are all projects that are being built now. And our position as a spatial quality committee, we cannot say anything about the housing situation, which we do, but they don't have to do anything with it, the developers. And I also asked the architects that were in the room, how do you deal with this? Do you want to design places like this? And some of them said, this is the reason I don't want to design anymore, because these are all investment objects that we are designing. We are not designing a space to live.
I think I
Yeah,
personal struggle.
I can imagine.
Because I don't know exactly, and also there's so many, like you are in the committee of the Delft, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so they also have them in Rotterdam, and they want something else, and then they have the person that's giving me the assignment that wants something totally, they just
Yeah.
want to extrude the plot that
Yeah.
I have, they want to build maximum height,
Yeah,
maximum width.
yeah.
That doesn't make it fit in the street profile with where there's like tiny houses. So I find it's very difficult debate and how I should position myself between all these people and
Yeah.
maybe say to the or the my I don't know how to say it.
Client?
My client to be like, hey, well maybe you should make less houses.
Yeah.
Maybe you should make some more public space.
Yeah.
I don't know how where this responsibility is.
Well, I think it's an architect's responsibility to just to address it and see what happens, but I should definitely keep addressing and stressing out that it's important if you make tiny apartments, that you need something to counterbalance these situations. But yeah, it's a thin line because you don't want to, you know, you have to also, you want to design and build. So, yeah. Bring home the bacon, zoals Wouter zou zeggen, toch? You need to bring home the bacon.
I know this is like super with the housing project. I think he's in Tokyo, but the architect made like super really tiny houses, and like each unit, let's say, has only one facility, which is like toilet or kitchen or I don't know, garden. So then like the whole habitants of the building, let's say, to have either toilet, either garden, either kitchen, they went to the only one who had this facility. But I found it like super weird because why when he just like missed out the part in building actually one communal public space or like public private space inside these tiny spaces. But he just like splitted each facility according to each like small unit, and then the whole inhabitants of this big building in the end, who have a shower or to cook together, they had to shift from one house to the other. It is weird. Yeah. I mean, it's a super weird thing. And this project, I think I discovered it because they actually presented it in the Rotterdam Film Festival now as a sort of documentary to show how can people be actually able to live together and to share like communal internal spaces. But I found it super weird, like rather than just building a garden or a shared kitchen, they just split up the facilities in blocks.
Yes, it's like forced, because everybody needs to shower, so this is like forced communal living.
Yeah, also this. But then it is also weird from the other side because it's of course very well designed in terms of measures and all the kind of also furniture that can act like double size, so something can be a bed but also can be a table. But then after all, you just have to you're actually forced to share your I don't know, like 2 square meters apartment, it's like super small, with other 10 people, only because they need at one point to have a shower or to do.
But maybe this is the future of housing, because we don't have enough space left, so what to do?
Or we need different regulations. I mean,
yeah, or just accept that there's no space and that this is the way we have to live. Well, but that's a bit of a doom scenario, but yeah.
Hey, thanks a lot, Annuska.
You're welcome.
For this trip.